I met Stephanie at a party back in 2004. I remember it like it was yesterday. The way she laughed, the way she looked at me like she had known me forever, even though we just met. Something clicked instantly. You know that feeling when you just know someone is going to be part of your life forever? That was her. We started talking, dancing, drinking something we probably shouldn't have. And by the end of the night, I knew my life had changed. She made everything feel lighter, brighter, and somehow safer at the same time. We were together for 7 years. 7 years of waking up to each other, falling asleep together, sharing meals, sharing jokes, sharing everything. It was perfect. She was the love of my life. I mean, I don't think you really understand the word perfect until you experience it. She wasn't flawless, but she fit with me in a way that made all the chaos outside the world feel meaningless. She was my best friend, my partner in crime, my teammate, my soulmate. And we even had a dog, Dutch, who was probably the happiest, dumbest, sweetest dog you'll ever meet. And he was ours. I asked her to marry me one rainy evening. I remember holding the ring in my pocket for hours, pacing around the flat, trying to act normal, trying to breathe. She said yes. That word, that moment, it felt like the world stopped for a second. Everything seemed aligned, every light in the city brighter, every street quieter, every breath deeper. We were going to be together forever. I believed it with every part of me. Then 3 months later, everything went to hell. Stephanie was murdered by someone completely unstable, someone who shouldn't have had access to her at her job at a mental health facility. I don't even know how to put into words what that feels like. I remember hearing it and just staring at the wall for what felt like hours. My brain refused to process it. My stomach refused to exist. I went numb. There were no tears at first, just shock, disbelief, a kind of frozen horror. It was like the air itself had been sucked out of my lungs. I don't know if anyone can really understand losing someone like that. Someone you plan your whole life around. Someone who was literally everything you could ever imagine loving. Just ripped out of your world. It's not like a breakup. It's not like moving on. It's like someone turned your life upside down and left you crawling to the rubble, trying to find your own heartbeat in the dust. That's what the first weeks were like. Waking up every morning and remembering she wasn't there. Going to bed every night and knowing she would never come back. The phone never ringing with her laugh. The texts never arriving. The whole world reminding you that she was gone. And yet, there was Dutch. That dog, that sweet, dumb, loving dog who didn't understand the loss, but somehow felt it anyway. He stayed with me when I couldn't stay with myself. He licked my tears. He curled up on the floor beside me when I couldn't move from the bed. He was the only living thing that made sense when nothing else did. I swear, Dutch saved my life. I remember walking to the flat, the empty flat, thinking about every moment we had together, every joke, every silly argument, every lazy Sunday morning in bed. And then I would look at Dutch, wagging his tail, oblivious of the horror of the world, and somehow it made me want to keep breathing. Because if I stopped, there'd be no one left, and Dutch depended on me. Somehow, in that tiny spark, I found a reason. The first months were a blur. Days didn't exist. Nights didn't exist. There was only pain and absence and the sound of Dutch whining in the next room. Friends tried to call. Family tried to reach me. But I wasn't there. I wasn't anywhere. I walked around the streets of London like a ghost, seeing people live their lives, laugh, argue, love, completely unaware that someone else had just lost everything. Every couple I saw holding hands, every person smiling, every family walking together. It was like a reminder that my world had ended and theirs hadn't. I started sleeping in Dutch's bed some nights just so I wouldn't feel the empty space where she used to be. I stopped eating properly, stopped answering calls, stopped trying to function. I didn't cry at first. I didn't know how. The tears came later, sometimes when I was alone, sometimes when I thought no one was watching. And when they did, it felt like relief and pain all at once, like the body finally letting go of something it had been holding too tightly for months. Memories hit me at the strangest times. The way she would hum while cooking, the way she would roll her eyes at my terrible jokes, the way Dutch would jump up on her lap, and she would laugh so hard it echoed through the flat. And every memory was a dagger and a comfort at the same time. Every single one reminded me that she existed, that she was real, and that she was gone forever. I started talking to therapists, trying to process it, trying to make sense of the senseless. Some days it helped. Some days it didn't. Some days I felt like I could breathe again. And some days I wondered why I was even still alive. But through it all, Dutch was there, wagging his tail, ready to remind me that life hadn't completely abandoned me. He was a constant in a world that had gone completely mad. I remember walking to the park with him one morning, sun just peeking through the clouds, the city slowly waking up, people jogging, kids playing, couples laughing. And I realized I hadn't smiled in months. Not a real smile. I didn't want to smile. But Dutch looked up at me, those big innocent eyes, and I couldn't help it. I smiled, tiny, shaky, unsure, but I smiled. And in that moment, I understood something. Survival wasn't about being okay. It wasn't about forgetting her. It was about keeping one small spark of life, one tiny connection to the world, and holding on to it, no matter how fragile. There were nights when I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what life had stolen from me, thinking about all the plans we had made, all the dreams, all the jokes, all the moments that would never exist now. And then I would feel Dutch nudge my hand, reminding me that I still had something, someone, and that maybe that was enough. Maybe surviving, even just barely, was the first step. I started to go outside more, to walk the streets, to see the city, to remember that life kept moving even if mine felt paused. I would pass cafes, people laughing over coffee, couples holding hands, families walking dogs. And I would think about her, and I would think about Dutch, and I would realize that even in the presence of unspeakable loss, there was still beauty. Tiny, quiet, almost invisible beauty. I don't know how long it took me to start feeling alive again. Maybe months, maybe years. But little by little, I started to remember how to breathe without thinking about the emptiness. Little by little, I started to remember how to smile for myself, not for anyone else. Little by little, I started to write again, to talk again, to exist again. Dutch was always by my side, always reminding me that I had to eat, had to walk, had to live. And slowly, I began to accept that she was gone, that nothing would ever make sense again, and that the only thing I could do was move forward. Not because I wanted to forget Stephanie, but because she would have wanted me to survive. Because survival isn't about happiness. It's about breathing. It's about living. It's about holding on to the smallest thing that keeps you tethered to the world. And that's where I am now. I walk with Dutch every morning. I see the world around me, and I feel the ache, the loss, the memory, but I also feel life. I feel the air, the city, the movement, the small joys that remain even after tragedy. I still cry. I still remember. I still ache, but I am alive. And in that survival, in that clinging to the smallest spark of hope, I am learning how to keep going, how to keep living, and maybe one day how to find a kind of peace I didn't think was possible. I remember one of the first nights, I actually left the flat alone, taking Dutch with me. The city was quiet, the streets wet from rain that had just stopped, the air sharp but clean. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just walked, letting my feet decide, letting the world move me, hoping that maybe moving through it would somehow move me too. People passed, faces blurred, laughter echoing the distance, car engines humming, streetlights casting long shadows. And I realized something strange. The world hadn't stopped. Life hadn't paused for my grief. It kept going, relentless and indifferent. And maybe that was the point. Dutch tugged at the leash, eager to explore, to sniff every puddle, to chase every stray leaf blown by the wind. And in his small, simple happiness, I found a strange kind of guidance. He didn't care about what I had lost, about the woman I loved, about the emptiness I carried. He only cared about now, the present, the next sniff, the next step, the next moment. And slowly, I started to think maybe that was what I needed too. Not to try and fix the past, not to hope for things to be as they were, but to live the moment I had, even if it was small, even if it was imperfect. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way sunlight hit the bricks of old buildings in certain streets. the sound of children laughing in the parks, the smell of fresh bread from corner bakeries, the rhythm of buses and trams moving through the city. Small, everyday things that reminded me that the world was still alive, and maybe so was I. But the nights were the hardest. Quiet, long, and unforgiving. I would sit in the flat, Dutch at my feet, staring at nothing and everything at the same time. The silence was heavy, almost a living thing pressing against my chest. Memories would hit in waves, her laugh, the way she would scold me for leaving dishes in sink, the mornings when we'd argue over nothing and make up within minutes. I would hold Dutch close, and sometimes I would cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just silently, shaking, letting the grief move through me without trying to stop it. Over time, I began to talk more. Not to everyone, not to strangers, but to a few people I trusted. Friends who didn't judge, who didn't expect me to be okay, who just listened. Therapy helped too, though slowly. Each session peeled back a layer of pain, showed me the patterns of grief, the ways I had stopped living, the ways I had held on to the past. And while it didn't take the pain away, and I don't think it ever will, it gave me tools to survive it, tools to start moving forward, one small step at a time. Dutch remained my constant companion. He was more than a dog. He was a reminder that life could still be simple, still be kind, still be full of small joys even after unimaginable loss. I started taking him on long walks, to parks, along canals, through quiet neighborhoods. And in those walks, something changed. I began noticing other people, their lives, their struggles, their happiness. I began to reconnect with the world. I smiled at strangers, nodded at familiar faces, helped people with small things. And slowly, I began to feel a tiny flicker of belonging again. I remember the day I realized I could breathe without thinking about her for a moment, without the weight of grief pressing down on my chest. It was a simple moment. Walking through a small market, Dutch at my side, sun streaming through the clouds, the smell of fresh pastries in the air. I laughed at something a vendor said, a silly joke about a cat, and for one brief second, the world didn't feel empty. And I realized that survival wasn't just about existing anymore. It was about noticing the moments, the little sparks of life that were always there, even when grief made them hard to see. There were setbacks, of course. Days when the grief hit like a physical blow. Nights when I couldn't sleep. When memories felt like sharp knives in my chest. But even then, I started to learn resilience. I started to understand that healing wasn't linear, that it didn't follow rules, that it could be slow, messy, painful, but also deeply real. I learned to sit with the sadness without letting it consume me. I learned that missing someone didn't mean I couldn't move forward. I learned that surviving heartbreak wasn't just about enduring. It was about learning to live again in spite of it. I began writing again, first in small journals, then longer pieces. Writing became my way to process, to breathe, to turn the chaos inside my head into words I could hold, examine, understand. I wrote about Stephanie, about Dutch, about the flat, about the streets of London, about the moments that mattered and the moments that felt empty. And in the writing, I found clarity. I found connection. I found myself. Slowly, life returned. Not perfectly, not completely, but it returned. I started seeing friends again, joining conversations, laughing at jokes. I started taking care of myself, physically and mentally. I cooked meals, went for runs, kept Dutch healthy and happy. And somewhere in that rhythm, I realized that survival had shifted into living, that grief and love could coexist, that memories could be honored without being chains, that the past could shape me without destroying me. And yet, I never forget. Every time I look at Dutch, I remember her. Every time I walk through the streets we once walked together, I feel her absence. Every night, when I lie awake, I remember her smile, her laugh, the way she made everything feel alive. But now, those memories are not knives. They are reminders. Reminders of love, reminders of life, reminders that even when the worst happens, even when grief is unbearable, there is still a way to keep going, to keep breathing, to keep living. The mornings were the hardest at first. Waking up without her beside me, without her warmth, without that sense of completeness that had become my normal. Dutch would nuzzle against me, and I'd feel the tiniest bit of life return to my chest, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. Some days, I'd sit on the edge of bed for hours, just stare at the floor, thinking about what could have been, what will never be. The flat was quiet, eerily quiet, like a museum dedicated to memories, each object holding a fragment of our life together. And yet, it was in that quiet that I began noticing things I'd ignored before: the sunlight filtering through the curtains in the early morning, the smell of rain hitting the pavement outside, the soft of the fridge in the kitchen. Small things, almost invisible, but they were reminders that life still existed, even if mine felt broken. I started walking more, not for exercise, not for distraction, but just to move, to feel the streets beneath my feet, to hear the city breathe around me. London in the early morning has a rhythm all its own. Buses rattling along empty streets, shopkeepers opening their doors, cyclists weaving through puddles, birds finding the occasional patch of sunlight. And while people around me lived their lives, I felt like a ghost passing through, unnoticed, untouched, carrying this heavy weight of grief. But Dutch, oblivious to the sorrow, led me on, sniffing every lamppost, chasing leaves blown by the wind. Somehow, in his simple joy, I began remembering how to feel again, little by little. Some nights I would find myself in front of the television, Dutch curled at my feet, staring at shows we once watched together, and I'd break down silently. It wasn't dramatic crying, no sobs that shook the walls, just quiet, aching tears that traced paths down my face, letting the grief flow without demanding attention. And in those tears, I started to recognize the love I still carried for her. Not in a possessive way, not in a way that chained me, but in a way that reminded me she had been real, that she had mattered, that her existence had left marks that would never fade. I began to interact with people again, very slowly. Friends who had stopped calling, because they didn't know what to say, family members who had feared pushing me too far. I'd meet them for coffee, for small meals, for walks, and each time it felt like I was practicing life again, talking, laughing, listening, sharing. Sometimes it felt unnatural, forced even, but gradually the conversations became easier, the smiles less painful. And in those small, ordinary interactions, I realized life could still exist even after unimaginable loss. Dutch became more than just a companion. He was a teacher in his own way. He reminded me to live in the moment. When he was happy, he didn't think about yesterday or tomorrow. He didn't dwell on what was lost or mourn for what couldn't be. He simply existed fully, completely, with all his heart. And in watching him, I began to understand that maybe that was a lesson I had been missing. Survival wasn't about forgetting, wasn't about moving on in a traditional sense. It was about allowing yourself to exist again, to breathe again, to find joy in the small, simple moments even when life had dealt you the cruelest hand. There were mornings when I would find myself laughing at the absurdity of everyday life. A pigeon stealing a sandwich on the street, a child running past with exaggerated joy, a stranger's silly dance in a park fountain. And I realized that laughter wasn't betrayal. It wasn't forgetting Stephanie. It wasn't a step away from love. It was proof that I was still alive, that I was still capable of feeling, of connecting, of being human. Sometimes I would take Dutch to the places we used to go together. The park where we threw sticks for him, the coffee shop where she always ordered her favorite latte, the streets where we walked hand in hand. And those walks were painful, filled with echoes of laughter and whispers of memories. But they were also grounding. They reminded me that love had existed, and that the world, even after tragedy, continued to hold beauty and life. I started writing again. At first, it was just small notes in a notebook, thoughts, memories, feelings I couldn't say aloud. Then it became longer passages, reflections on life, on loss, on grief, on love, on hope. Writing became a lifeline, a way to take the chaos inside my head and put it into something tangible. And in the process, I began to see patterns, understand emotions, and recognize that survival didn't mean returning to who I was before. It meant becoming someone who could carry the memory of love, the weight of loss, and still step into the world, still breathe, still live. The nights remained long, quiet, heavy, sometimes cruel. But even in the darkness, I found small lights. Dutch nudging me awake with a soft whine, a friend's unexpected message checking in, a stranger's smile on the street, moments that reminded me that even when life breaks you, it also gives you tiny sparks to hold on to. And slowly, I began to notice change. Not sudden, not dramatic, just subtle shifts in how I felt. A smile lingered longer. Laughter came easier. I started to plan small things, meals, walks, small goals of the day. I realized that life wasn't asking me to forget Stephanie. It was asking me to live alongside the memory, to carry it, and to still find moments of light in a world shadowed by loss. Some mornings, I still wake up and forget, just for a split second, that she's gone. That's the cruel part. The brief moment of relief before reality crashes back in like a wave. Dutch jumps up on the bed, shaking himself, sending droplets across the sheets, and suddenly I'm aware again. The flat is too quiet. The bed is too big. The world feels too heavy. But then I look at Dutch, wagging his tail, eyes bright and hopeful, and I realize I still have to show up, not for anyone else, not for the world, but for him, for this tiny thread that's keeping me tethered to life. I've started noticing people again, not in a casual way, not just as passing shadows, but really noticing them. Their smiles, their frowns, the way they carry themselves. There's a woman I see every morning at the coffee shop, always laughing at something on her phone, always polite, always warm. And sometimes I catch her eye, and we nod, and it's a tiny connection that feels huge. A reminder that the world isn't just empty, that there are pockets of life and joy even in the middle of pain. I started walking longer distances, exploring parts of the city I'd never paid attention to. Little streets with hidden cafes, bookstores with handwritten notes in the windows, murals tucked behind corners. The world had always been there, of course, but my grief had made it invisible. It's funny how loss can blind you to life, how heartbreak can make everything feel dull and gray. But as I walked, Dutch trotting beside me, sniffing the leaves and investigating every lamppost, I began to see color again, subtle at first. The green of leaves, the orange of streetlights, the soft blue of the morning sky, but enough to remind me that life persists. Some nights, I still think about that day when everything changed, the way she laughed that morning, unaware of what would come, the way I held her hand, feeling it slip from mine forever, and the way Dutch had been our shadow, always between us, always bringing joy. I think about those 7 years, the mundane arguments, the silly jokes, the quiet evenings, the coffee runs, the holidays we planned and never took. And then I think about the 3 months of engagement, the excitement, the hope, the dream of a life together that would never happen. I started talking to people about it slowly. Therapy was one thing, friends another, but strangers sometimes too. There's a strange kind of connection in sharing grief with someone who doesn't know you, who can't judge you. One evening, I ended up at a small cafe on a quiet street, Dutch by my side, and I told the barista about her, just pieces, fragments of my life. And in telling it, I realized the story had weight, it had meaning, that even though my world had ended, sharing it made it live in some way. It made the pain less lonely. I write a lot now. I write for her. I write for Dutch. I write for myself. My journals are filled with memories, with reflections, with thoughts about life, love, and survival. Writing has become a lifeline, a way to take the chaos of grief and turn it into something tangible. Something that doesn't sting as sharply when it's on paper. Something I can hold, revisit, and learn from. Some days are better than others. I still have moments where the grief hits like a wave, where I can't breathe, where I can't see past a loss. But I've learned to survive those moments. I've learned that surviving heartbreak isn't just about enduring the pain. It's about finding a way to exist alongside it, to carry it without letting it consume you, to look at the world, to feel it, to be part of it again, even when it hurts. Dutch remains my anchor. He doesn't understand loss in a human sense, but he knows absence, he knows sadness, and he knows comfort. When I sit on the edge of the sofa, staring at the floor, he nudges my hand, resting his head against me. When I wake up in the morning, he's there, ready for the day, full of life and love. And in those moments, I feel a tiny spark, a reminder that the world hasn't completely ended, that I haven't completely ended. I started noticing small joys again. A warm cup of tea in the morning, sunlight streaming through the window, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the sound of rain hitting the pavement, the laughter of children playing in the park. I realize that life is still full of these small, ordinary moments that can be beautiful if you allow yourself to notice them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, I began to allow myself to notice them. I even began imagining a future again, not the one I had planned with her, not the one that had been stolen, but a future for me and Dutch. Small goals, small achievements, moments of happiness that I can build on. And in imagining that, I found a sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Not because I had forgotten her, not because the pain was gone, but because life was still here, and it demanded that I keep showing up for it. Some evenings, I still find myself sitting on the balcony with Dutch at my feet, the city lights flickering below, and feeling a strange mix of emptiness and calm. It's quiet, almost peaceful, but it's the kind of peace that comes with scars. You know, the kind that makes you realize that life will never be the same, but it's still life. I watch couples walking past, holding hands, laughing, sharing inside jokes that I can't hear, and for a moment it stings. That old ache returned like it never left. But then Dutch nudges my hand, and I'm reminded that I'm not completely alone. I started noticing the little things again, things I'd taken for granted before Stephanie was gone. The way the wind feels on my face in the early morning, the sound of birds in park, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from a cafe down the street. I began to appreciate these moments, fleeting and small, and realize that even in the midst of grief, life still offers beauty if you let it. It's not the same as before, never the same, but it's enough to keep you moving, enough to keep you alive. I found myself talking to people I barely knew. Not about grief, not about Stephanie at first, but about life, about work, about the weather, about nothing in particular. And slowly, the walls I had built around myself began to crumble. People don't always need to fix you. They just need to show up. And in their presence, in their ordinary company, I started to feel a little less broken. Dutch became my world in ways I didn't expect. He wasn't just a reminder to keep living. He became a companion who could sense when I was low, when the memories felt too heavy. He would curl up beside me on the sofa, leaning against my leg, letting me cry into his fur without judgment, without questions, just presence. And in that, I found a kind of love that was steady, reliable, and healing in a way I hadn't realized I needed. Some mornings, I'd take him to the park and watch the sunrise. The sky opens up in shades of orange and pink, the city slowly waking up, joggers passing by, kids running to school. I sit on a bench, Dutch resting at my feet, and I think about the past, about Stephanie, about the life I thought I'd have. And then I think about now, about the fact that I'm still breathing, still walking, still here. It's not perfect. It's not what I wanted, but it's life. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can hold it without it crushing me. I started to engage with the world in ways I hadn't imagined. Small acts of kindness, noticing strangers who looked lonely, helping someone carry groceries, a smile, a nod. It's strange how these little gestures remind you that connection still exists even after immense loss. Even when the one person you love the most is gone, the world still holds fragments of humanity that make it worth participating in again. There are nights when I still dream of her. Vivid dreams that make me wake up gasping, heart racing, the flat silent except for Dutch's steady breathing beside me. In those dreams, we're laughing, holding hands, living the life that was stolen from us. And when I wake, I feel the sharp edge of reality pressing down. But over time, I've learned to carry the dreams differently, not as pain, not as longing, but as reminders of what love can be, what it was, and what it leaves behind in your heart. I began to take more care of myself. Eating, exercising, keeping a routine. Not because it erased the grief, not because it made things better, but because it reminded me that I am still here, that I still exist, and that I owe it to Dutch and to myself to keep going. Each small step became an act of survival, a declaration that grief may bend me, but it won't break me completely. And slowly, I started noticing light in ordinary things again. A child laughing uncontrollably at a joke. A stranger helping an elderly person across the street. A barista remembering my coffee order. These small sparks, seemingly insignificant, became beacons, reminders that life continues, that hope can exist even in the shadow of unimaginable loss. Sometimes I sit by the river, Dutch at my side, watching the water move, reflecting the city lights. I think about what life taught me, that love is fragile, that loss is brutal, that grief is unrelenting, but that survival is possible. That even in the darkest moments, there are glimpses of light if you're willing to see them, if you're willing to take the next step, even when it feels impossible. I began journaling more, longer passages, reflections, conversations with myself, with Stephanie, with the life that was and the life that remains. Writing became a therapy, a way to untangle the mess inside my head, to honor the memories, and to remind myself that though she was gone, I was still here. I still have moments of despair, moments when the grief feels like it could swallow me whole. But now, I've learned to sit with it, to breathe through it, to let it pass without losing myself completely. Survival isn't about being unaffected. It's about feeling fully and still keeping one foot in the world, still moving, still existing. And through it all, Dutch remains my anchor, my constant, my reminder that life, no matter how cruel, offers small joys and responsibilities that keep you tethered to the present. Every wag of his tail, every soft nudge, every excited bark reminds me that there is still life, still connection, still love in forms that endure even after loss. Some afternoons, I wander through the streets, Dutch trotting beside me, and I let my mind drift. The city has a rhythm, a pulse, and at first it felt alien, like it belonged to everyone else but me. But slowly, as I watched shopkeepers arrange displays, as I smelled the aroma of fresh bread from bakeries, as I saw children racing past laughing, I began to feel a little part of it again. The world didn't stop for grief, and neither could I. And maybe that's a lesson. Grief isn't a pause button. It's a shadow you carry while still moving forward. I began noticing the small routines that make life meaningful. Coffee in the morning, a proper breakfast, checking in on Dutch, making a flat tidy. Even if just a little, I realized that survival isn't about grand gestures. It's about showing up for the ordinary things, day after day, even when your heart feels hollow. These routines became anchors, little reminders that I was still here, still breathing, still capable of life. Evenings are still the hardest. The quiet presses against me, memories flooding back uninvited. I sit on the sofa, Dutch at my side, sometimes crying quietly, sometimes just staring at nothing. But even in that emptiness, I've learned to sit with it, to accept it, to let it exist without letting it consume me entirely. It's not easy, it's not simple, but it's possible. And every night I make it through, I'm reminded that surviving heartbreak doesn't mean forgetting. It means finding a way to carry the love and the loss and still keep moving. I started noticing people in a new way. Not just faces in the crowd, but stories in the eyes of strangers. A mother struggling with her stroller, a man laughing at a street performer, a group of teenagers arguing playfully. Life is happening all around me, messy and chaotic, beautiful and imperfect. And I realize that even though my own story had taken a brutal turn, life itself continues. There is still connection, still joy, still laughter, if I choose to see it. Writing has become my refuge. I fill notebooks with memories, reflections, and conversations I have with myself and with Stephanie. Sometimes I write letters I'll never send, conversations I'll never have, apologies I'll never give. And in writing, I find a strange kind of release, a way to process the unprocessable. The pages hold my grief, my love, my hope, my survival. And slowly, through words, I begin to see a path forward. Dutch continues to teach me lessons I didn't know I needed. Patience, presence, joy in the small things. When he chases a leaf blown by the wind, he doesn't worry about tomorrow or mourn the past. He exists fully in the moment, and in watching him, I begin to practice the same. Not perfectly, not always, but I try, and in those attempts, I find the tiniest flickers of life returning to me. Small lights that grow brighter with time. I still think about Stephanie constantly. Every day in small ways. A smell that reminds me of her perfume, a song she loved, a joke only she would understand. And yet, over time, the grief has shifted. It's no longer a crushing weight that stops me from moving. It's a thread that ties me to love we shared, a reminder that love was real, and that memory can be both painful and sustaining. Some nights, I sit by the river, Dutch at my feet, city lights reflecting off the water. I watch the world move, people living, loving, struggling, laughing, crying. And I think about how fragile life is, how cruel loss can be, and yet how resilient the human spirit is. How it's possible to carry grief and still find moments of beauty, still find sparks of hope, still exist fully even after unimaginable pain. I have moments of joy again, small, fleeting but real. The warmth of the sun on my face, the laughter of children in the park, the smell of fresh coffee, a friendly conversation with a stranger. These moments remind me that life is still possible, that surviving isn't about being happy every day. It's about noticing the small lights, the tiny sparks, and allowing them to guide you forward step by step. I begin to imagine the future in fragments, small pieces. Not the life I lost, not the dreams stolen, but new dreams. Walks with Dutch, visits to the park, cups of coffee in cafes, friendships rebuilt, days survived, moments cherished. And in imagining these fragments, I feel a sense of purpose returning, a reason to keep moving, to keep living, to keep existing in a world that feels both cruel and beautiful at the same time. And through all of it, Dutch remains by my side, the reminder that life continues, that love persists, that even after the worst things happen, there is still reason to keep going. Every wag of his tail, every nuzzle, every look of trust and loyalty reminds me that there's life worth living, even if it is different from the life I had planned. Some mornings, I wake up and the emptiness hits me before my eyes even open. It's not sudden anymore, not like the early days when grief felt like a physical weight pressing me into mattress. Now it's quieter, subtler, almost like a shadow brushing past my consciousness. Dutch stirs beside me, tail flicking, a soft whine reminding me he's ready for the day. And in that small act, his insistence on life, on movement, I remember that I must rise too. I must keep moving forward, even when the past clings to my chest like a cold, wet coat. Walking through the city has become a kind of therapy. I watch people, really watch them now, noticing the small gestures that make life human. A mother helping her child tie their shoelaces, a man laughing with his friends, a street performer making a passerby smile. Every detail, every moment, reminds me that life goes on. And even if my world feels broken, there are still pieces of it I can touch, small joys I can hold, fragments of normality I can cling to. I've started talking to people again, cautiously, tentatively. Small conversations with baristas, nods to strangers, a chat with a neighbor about the weather. It feels strange at first, like I'm learning how to interact with the world again. But each exchange, no matter how small, reminds me that I'm still part of this life. That survival isn't just about enduring grief. It's about reconnecting bit by bit to the world around you. Some evenings, I sit on the balcony, Dutch resting his head on my knee, and watch the city lights flicker. Couples pass by, holding hands, laughing, oblivious to the ghosts that follow others like me. And for a moment it stings, that old ache in my chest. But then Dutch nudges me, reminding me that I am still here, that I can still breathe, that I can still feel. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sting softens. Grief is still there, yes, but it no longer defines every moment. I've started noticing the small joys of life again. The smell of fresh bread from the bakery, sunlight streaming through the clouds, the way rain sounds when it hits the pavement, the laughter of children in the park. Life is still messy, chaotic, unpredictable, but it is still life, and I am still part of it. Writing has become my refuge. I fill journals with memories of Stephanie, reflections on grief, thoughts on survival. Sometimes I write letters I'll never send, conversations I'll never have. And in these pages, I find clarity. I see patterns in my grief, moments of growth, flashes of understanding. I see that surviving heartbreak doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to carry love and loss together, to live alongside them, not beneath them. Dutch remains my constant, my anchor. He doesn't understand grief the way humans do, but he knows presence, loyalty, and joy. When he jumps up excitedly for a walk, when he rests his head on my lap as I cry quietly, when he nudges me awake in the morning, he teaches me, without words, to keep moving, to keep existing, to keep finding small moments of happiness, even when the world feels heavy. I've started imagining a future again. Not the one stolen from me, not the one I thought I had with Stephanie, but a new one. Small goals, small joys, tiny sparks of life that I can cultivate and cherish. Walks with Dutch, meals in cafes, visits to the park, conversations with friends, moments of laughter. And in imagining these fragments, I feel the tiniest flicker of hope returning, a reason to continue, a reason to show up each day, even when the grief whispers that it's pointless. I think about Stephanie often, every day in small ways, a smell, a song, a memory. And though it still hurts, the pain has shifted. It's no longer a crushing weight, but a thread that connects me to the love we shared. A reminder that love was real, that it mattered, and that memory can be both painful and sustaining. Some nights, I sit by the river with Dutch, watching the water reflect the city lights. I think about life, about loss, about survival. I think about how fragile it is, how cruel grief can be, and yet how resilient humans are. How it's possible to carry heartbreak and still notice beauty, still find moments of joy, still exist fully in a world that has taken so much from you. I've learned that life is in the small details. A child's laughter, a stranger's smile, the smell of fresh coffee, a bird singing in the morning. These fragments of life, though tiny, remind me that the world continues, that hope persists, that joy can exist even after unimaginable loss. And I've learned to notice them, to cherish them, to let them guide me forward. Evenings are still quiet, still heavy, but they are no longer paralyzing. I sit with Dutch, sometimes crying, sometimes simply breathing, and I remember that survival is not perfection. It's not happiness every moment. It's presence, awareness, endurance. It's choosing to live even when the world feels unfair, even when grief whispers that life isn't worth it. And every day I survive, every moment I show up, I am practicing life. Some mornings, I linger in bed longer than I should, listening to the faint hum of the city outside, the rhythm of life that keeps going even when yours is fractured. Dutch shifts beside me, a soft whine reminding me he's awake, ready to start the day. I pull myself up slowly, every movement heavy, weighed down not by tiredness, but by the memory of what I lost. 7 years with Stephanie, the engagement, the plans, the little routines we built together, and then all of it gone. I try to fill the empty spaces with ordinary life, coffee, newspapers, walks. But at first it feels hollow. The shops are open, the trains run on schedule, people talk and laugh, but it's like watching a film in which I have no role. Grief has a way of isolating you. It isn't just sadness, it's a filter through which the world passes, and you can barely touch it. But Dutch grounds me. He demands attention in ways no human ever could. Nose nudging my hand, tail wagging, eyes wide and expectant. And in that, I find the tiniest flicker of purpose. Some afternoons, I wander aimlessly through the city, not to escape, not to distract myself, but just to feel the pulse of life again. London is alive in ways I have forgotten. The chatter of markets, the smell of baked goods, the rumble of buses, the clatter of bicycles on cobblestones. At first, it's overwhelming. Too much noise, too many reminders that life is moving, relentless, and indifferent. But slowly, I begin to notice beauty again. The sunlight hitting a puddle, a child chasing a pigeon, an old couple holding hands across a cafe table. People become fascinating to watch, not in a nosy way, but in a way that makes me feel connected to something bigger. Strangers laughing, arguing, rushing to work, pausing to watch the world pass by. I start to realize that while Stephanie's absence has created an enormous hole in my world, life itself continues, vibrant and messy, and it is possible to step back into it, bit by bit. Writing becomes my refuge. I journal endlessly. Memories of Stephanie, thoughts I can't speak aloud, reflections on grief, survival, and the strange resilience that life demands. I write letters I'll never send, conversations I'll never have, apologies I'll never give. But in putting it down on paper, the chaos in my head becomes something I can see, something tangible. And slowly, it feels less suffocating. Slowly, it feels manageable. Dutch is my teacher in ways I hadn't expected. He doesn't understand grief, but he understands presence, patience, joy. When he chases a leaf or a stray ball in the park, he isn't worried about tomorrow. When he rests his head on my knee as I cry quietly, he doesn't demand answers, just gives comfort. And watching him, I learn to exist in the moment again, to take each day as it comes, to find the smallest joys and hold them tightly. Some nights, I sit by the river, Dutch at my feet, watching the reflection of city lights on the water. The world moves around me, boats drifting, joggers running, traffic humming. And for a moment, I am just a man and his dog, witnessing life. I think about Stephanie, about the love we shared, about the life that was stolen, and the future I never imagined. And even though the pain still aches, it is softer, more manageable. It no longer paralyzes me completely. I begin to notice small fragments of hope. A stranger smiling at me on the street. A barista remembering my order. A child offer me a flower. Tiny sparks that remind me that life, even after tragedy, continues to offer moments worth noticing. I begin to gather these fragments, little by little, holding them like precious treasures. They are proof that survival is possible, that joy is possible, that life can continue even after unbearable loss. Some mornings, the light through the window feels warm again, not comforting in a false way, not like it's trying to erase grief, but just warm. I make tea, feed Dutch, step out into the city streets, and notice that I am breathing a little easier, that I am seeing a little more clearly, that I am beginning to exist alongside my grief instead of beneath it. I imagine the future in tiny steps. Walks in the park, cups of coffee in quiet cafes, conversations with friends, little joys to carry me forward. It's not the future I plan with Stephanie. It's not the life I thought I'd have, but it is mine, and for the first time in a long time, it feels like something I can live into step by step, moment by moment. Evenings are still heavy, still quiet, still a time when memories flood back unbidden. But now I have Dutch writing routines, small joys. Now I have the capacity to feel pain and still survive, to sit with grief and still see light. I've learned that surviving heartbreak is not about forgetting. It's about carrying love and loss together, learning to exist fully even when life has taken everything you thought you had. And through it all, Dutch remains. My anchor, my reminder, my reason to keep moving, to keep existing. Each wag of his tail, each soft nudge, each look of trust teaches me, without words, that life is still possible, that love is still possible, that survival is possible even after unimaginable pain. Some afternoons, I find myself sitting in the same cafe we used to go together, Dutch lying quietly at my feet. The smell of coffee, the murmur of conversations, the clinking of cups. It all reminds me of the life I once had, the normalcy I took for granted. I watch couples around me, their hands brushing, their laughter spilling into the air, and for a moment I feel the sharp sting of absence. But then Dutch shifts his weight, looks up at me with his soft brown eyes, and I remember that I am still here, that I can still be part of life, even if it's different now. I've started noticing the little things that make days worth living. The way sunlight hits the rooftops in the morning, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the subtle warmth of a stranger's smile. Life is messy, chaotic, unpredictable, but it still moves forward. And I realize that while grief can feel like it's swallowing you whole, it cannot erase the fragments of beauty that remain. It cannot stop the small joys that persist if you allow yourself to see them. Walking through the city has become a form of therapy. I drift along streets I never noticed before, exploring alleys, small parks, and quiet corners. I watch people, really watch them. An elderly man feeding pigeons, a mother holding her child's hand, a group of friends laughing too loudly. And in these ordinary moments, I find a strange comfort, a reminder that life continues, that there are still stories unfolding, and that even after tragedy, it's possible to exist, to participate, to find meaning in small, ordinary acts. Dutch remains my anchor. His presence is a constant reminder that life continues, that love persists, that it is possible to survive. When he curls up beside me in the evenings, resting his head on my knee, I feel the weight of grief settle into something bearable. When he barks at a stranger walking past, I am reminded that life is still happening, that the world still exists, and that I am still part of it. His companionship, his loyalty, his simple joy, these are lessons I never knew I needed. I've started writing again, journaling long passages about Stephanie, about grief, about survival. Some of it is painful, some of it is cathartic. I write letters I'll never send, conversations I'll never have, apologies I'll never give. And in the act of writing, I find a kind of release. I see my grief laid bare, tangible, something I can examine, something I can learn from. It doesn't take the pain away, but it makes it manageable. It makes it a part of my life instead of the entirety of it. Some nights, I sit by the river, Dutch at my feet, watching the lights of the city reflect on the water. The world moves around me, boats gliding, joggers running, traffic humming, and I sit quietly, absorbing it all. I think about Stephanie, about the life we planned, about the moments stolen from us. And I think about survival, about resilience, about the human capacity to endure. Pain does not define life. It shapes it. Loss does not end it. It teaches you how to carry it forward. I begin to notice sparks of joy again. A stranger holding a door open, a child laughing at a street performer, the warmth of tea in my hands, the quiet companionship of Dutch. These moments are small, fleeting, but they are proof that life continues. They remind me that even after the worst things happen, it is possible to exist fully, to participate in the world, to find meaning and connection once more. Some mornings, the sunlight streams into the flat, and I allow myself to feel its warmth. I make breakfast, feed Dutch, take him for a walk. The city is alive with movement, with noise, with ordinary beauty. I walk along the river, past the cafes, past the bookstores, past the people living their lives, and I feel a sense of belonging returning, tiny but persistent. I begin imagining the future in small, careful fragments. Walks in the park, visits to cafes, conversations with friends, moments of laughter and connection. Not the future I had with Stephanie, not the one stolen, but a new one, built slowly, carefully from the fragments that remain. And in imagining this future, I feel purpose returning, a reason to keep moving forward, a reason to exist in a world that has taken so much. Evenings are still quiet, still heavy, but they're no longer paralyzing. I sit with Dutch, sometimes crying quietly, sometimes just breathing, and I remember that survival is not perfection. It is endurance, presence, and willingness to keep moving. It is noticing beauty, small joys, and moments of connection. It is choosing life, even when grief whispers that it's pointless. And each day I survive, each moment I show up, I practice life again. Some nights, the quiet hits differently. It's not just silence. It's a heavy, pressing presence, a weight that makes every breath feel thick. Dutch curls up beside me, sensing it, nudging his nose against my hand, letting me know I'm not entirely alone. But the memories, they come rushing back, uninvited, like a storm you can't prepare for. I see her smile, hear her laugh, remember the softness of her hand in mine. And then I feel it, the unbearable emptiness that no comfort can fill. I remember the first time I cried alone, truly cried, after she was gone. Not a few tears here and there, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook me to my core. I sat on the edge of the bed, Dutch resting his head on my foot, and I let it out. All the anger, the disbelief, the helplessness, the longing, the years of love, the dreams we shared, the life we planned. Gone. And there was no one to hold me, no one to tell me it would be okay, just a dog who didn't judge, who simply stayed. And somehow, in that shared grief, I found a flicker of survival. Some days, the emptiness is a physical ache. Walking down the street, hearing someone laugh in a way that reminds me of her, smelling coffee in a cafe we used to go to, seeing couples holding hands. Each one is a knife twisting slowly. I try to distract myself, throw myself into routines, into work, into city life, into anything that doesn't involve thinking. But grief has a way of catching you, no matter how fast you run. And when it does, It's overwhelming. I catch myself talking to her sometimes, whispering to the empty room, telling her about my day, about Dutch, about life, about the small joys I found. And in those moments, it's like she's here, if only for a second. Not really, of course. She's gone. But it's enough to let me feel, to let me breathe, to let me remember that love doesn't truly die. It lingers in memory, in habit, in the way you notice the world. I think about the unfairness of it all. 7 years of love, of planning, of dreaming, 3 months of engagement, and then sudden, brutal, senseless loss. I think about the rage I felt, the questions I asked of the universe, the dark thoughts that crept in. Why her? Why me? Why us? And yet, through the anger, through the grief, through the nights that feel endless, I realize something terrifying and liberating. Life doesn't care about fairness. You can't bargain with it. You can't plead. You can only survive. Dutch has been my lifeline. He senses my darkest moments before I do. He nudges, he barks. He rests his head on me. In his presence, I feel a strange mixture of grief and love, pain and warmth. Caring for him gives me a reason to wake up, to feed, to move, to exist. I realize that survival isn't just about me. It's about the small life that depends on me, that trusts me to keep going even when I feel like I can't. Some nights, I stay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, imagining what life would have been. Our wedding day, our first home, our dog playing in the garden. I imagine her laugh, the way she looked at me when she was happy, the plans we whispered each other in the dark. And then I imagine the moment she was taken from me, the moment I had no control, no warning, no time to say goodbye. My chest tightens, my stomach twists, and I feel hollowed out. I've learned that grief is patient. It doesn't rush. It waits in corners, in the quiet, in the small moments when you're not expecting it. And it returns, sometimes when you think you've escaped it, sometimes in full force, breaking you open again. But I've also learned that I can survive it, over and over, that the human heart can endure far more than you think, that each day lived is a victory, however small. Sometimes I hold Dutch close and I whisper to him, telling him about her, telling him about the pain, telling him about the love. And in those moments, I feel less alone. I feel a thread connecting the past and the present, the love and the loss. It's fragile, tenuous, but it exists. And slowly, over months and years, I start to understand that survival isn't about moving on. It's about carrying love forward, even when the person is gone, even when the world seems unfair. Some mornings, I look in the mirror and see a man who has been broken, but who is still here, who has felt unimaginable loss, but still breathes, still walks, still exists. And in that reflection, I find a strange pride, not because I'm happy, not because I've forgotten, but because I am alive. I survived. I am still capable of love, of noticing beauty, of small joys, of laughter, of connection. And that, I realize, is everything. There are nights when a flat feels too big, too empty, too loud in its silence. I sit in the corner, Dutch at my side, and the memories come unbidden. The sound of her laugh echoes off the walls. The way she would toss her hair over her shoulder when she was thinking. The smell of her perfume lingering in the air, even though it's been months, years. And in those moments, I feel everything at once. Longing, despair, love, anger, helplessness. I try to remember the small things about her. The way she hummed when she cooked. The way she always left a blanket on the sofa. The way her hand felt in mine. And then I remember the moments I'll never get back. The mornings we would have woken up together. The coffee we would have shared. The trips we would have taken. The dog walks in the park we would have laughed through. They're gone, stolen in a heartbeat, and the emptiness presses in until it feels like I can't breathe. Some days, the grief is unbearable. I walk through the city and everyone seems alive except me. I hear laughter, see couples holding hands, children running past, friends chatting in cafes. And I feel invisible, like the world moved on and left me behind. I try to distract myself, coffee, work, walking Dutch. But the memories are persistent. The love we shared refuses to fade, refuses to let me escape, refuses to let me be ordinary again. Dutch becomes my anchor in the storm. He doesn't judge my tears. He doesn't question my silence. He simply stays. His loyalty is a lifeline. When he rests his head on my knee as I cry, when he nudges me awake in the mornings, when he runs joyfully to the park, I realize that survival isn't about forgetting. It's about presence. Showing up for the small life that depends on you, the small joys that still exist, the fragments of beauty that persist even after unimaginable loss. Some nights, I lie awake and imagine conversations with her. I imagine telling her about Dutch, about the city, about the ways I am surviving, about the tiny sparks of life I've begun to notice again. I imagine her laughing at my complaints, rolling her eyes at my stubbornness, smiling at the small victories I never expected to celebrate alone. And then I remember, painfully, that these conversations will never happen. And yet, imagining them brings both grief and a strange solace. I have moments when I feel guilty for laughing, for noticing beauty, for existing in a way that feels separate from her memory. But Dutch reminds me that life does not pause for grief, that survival is not betrayal, that carrying her memory does not mean I cannot feel joy again. And slowly, I begin to understand that grief and life can coexist, that love lost does not mean life ends, that survival is not just enduring, it is noticing, feeling, existing, even when it hurts. Some mornings, I watch the sunlight hit the rooftops, and I notice how beautiful it is. Not in a forced way, not like a lesson, just real, quiet beauty. I sip my coffee slowly, pet Dutch, watch him chase a bird for a moment of pure joy, and I feel a flicker of life inside me. The grief is still there, heavy and persistent, but so is the capacity to notice light, to feel warmth, to exist in this broken, beautiful, cruel, and tender world. I begin imagining a future again, not the one I had with Stephanie, not the life that was stolen, but one I can still shape. Walks with Dutch, conversations with friends, tiny adventures in the city, moment of laughter, cups of tea, glimpses of sunrise. These fragments are small, fragile, but they are mine, and in holding them, I feel a thread connecting me to survival, to hope, to the fact that life continues even after the unthinkable. Evenings remain the hardest. The quiet presses against me, the shadows of memory thick around the edges of the flat. I cry sometimes. I shout into pillows sometimes. I sit in silence for hours, Dutch curled beside me, feeling the weight of all I have lost. And still, in this darkness, I find resilience. I find a stubborn spark inside me refusing to die. I find a reason to keep waking up, to keep existing, to keep feeling, no matter how raw, no matter how painful, no matter how slow. I've learned that grief is patient, relentless, and impossible to outrun. It waits for the quiet, for the solitary moments, for when the world is asleep. It strikes unexpectedly, sometimes in tears, sometimes in sudden laughter and memory, sometimes in the ache of missing someone you can never touch again. And yet, I've also learned that survival is patient, too. It is slow. It is tiny. It is measured in breaths, in steps, in moments noticed, in small routines kept alive. Some nights, I hold Dutch close, whisper to him about Stephanie, about the life we shared, about the love and the loss. And in these whispered confessions, I feel less alone. I feel a thread connecting past and present, love and survival, memory and life. It is fragile, tenuous, but it exists. And it is enough to keep moving, one small step at a time, in a world that has taken so much yet still offers fragments of light. There are mornings when the world feels impossibly quiet, when the flat is too empty, and even the birds outside seem to hesitate before singing. Dutch nudges me awake, his warmth and presence a reminder that I am still here, that life continues even when it feels unbearable. I take a deep breath, sip my coffee slowly, and let the sunlight fill the room. Even in grief, sunlight can feel like a small miracle. It warms the cold edges of your chest. It reminds you that the world moves, that life moves, and that you can move too, even if just a little. I think about Stephanie constantly. 7 years of memories, of plans, of dreams that now exist only in my mind. I remember the way she would laugh when I teased her, the way her eyes lit up when she was excited, the way her hand fit perfectly in mine. And I remember the devastating day when all that was ripped away. So suddenly, so violently, so impossibly unfair. It's a grief I carry with me like a shadow, always present, always whispering. Dutch has been my lifeline. In the darkest moments, when I thought I couldn't breathe, couldn't get up, couldn't exist, he has been there. The soft nudge of his nose, the warmth of his body curling against mine, the way he looks at me with trust and devotion. He reminds me that I am not alone. That life, even after tragedy, continues. That love, even when it is gone, leaves something behind. Some evenings, I walk through city streets, Dutch by my side, and I notice the ordinary beauty I used to take for granted. Street performers, children laughing, couples holding hands, the smell of freshly baked bread, the sunlight glinting off the glass of tall buildings. At first, these things feel hollow, empty reminders of life that no longer exists. But slowly, they become threads connecting me back to the world, back to life, back to possibility. I write constantly. Letters to Stephanie I will never send, reflections on grief, fragments of memory, thoughts about survival. In writing, I find a strange clarity. I see the raw edges of my pain. But I also see the ways I am growing, the ways I am learning to live alongside the grief instead of being crushed by it. Words become my companions when human ones are absent, a way to process the unprocessable, a bridge between love lost and life continuing. There are nights when I cry quietly, when the grief washes over me in a tidal wave. I sob into the sofa, Dutch resting his head on my lap, offering silent comfort. I scream into pillows when the pain feels unbearable. And sometimes I sit in silence for hours, listening to hum of the city outside, feeling the emptiness inside. But in those moments, I also find something remarkable: endurance. A stubborn flicker that refuses to die. A part of me that says, you can still exist, you can still survive, you can still find meaning. Time has taught me strange lessons. That love never truly disappears. That grief never truly ends. That survival is not about forgetting or moving on. It's about carrying the memory, carrying the love, carrying the pain, and still showing up for life every day. I've learned to notice the smallest sparks: a child's laughter, a stranger's smile, the soft warmth of sunlight, the quiet loyalty of Dutch. These fragments become my anchor, reminders that life, even broken, can still be lived. I think about the future often, not the one I imagined with Stephanie, not the one stolen, but a new one, built slowly, step by step. Walks with Dutch, cups of tea in quiet cafes, conversations with friends, moments of laughter, moment of reflection, moments of noticing beauty. A future shaped not by what was lost, but by what remains, by what can still be cherished, by what life still offers. And I realized finally that surviving heartbreak is not about happiness. It's not about erasing the pain. It's about endurance. It's about presence. It's about noticing the beauty, small as it may be, even when your heart feels hollow. It's about carrying the love and the loss together, letting both shape you, letting both guide you. And through this, I find something profound. Life is possible again. Not the life I had, not the life I imagined, but life, still, with its fleeting joys, its small comforts, its quiet moments of connection. Some nights, I lie with Dutch curled beside me, looking at the ceiling, thinking of Stephanie. I whisper into quiet, telling her about the day, about the small victories, about the moments of light I've begun to see again. And in those whispers, I feel her presence, not in the physical, but in memory, in love, in the way that loss has taught me to survive. I've learned that love never truly leaves, that it shapes you, that it teaches you, that it endures even in absence. And so I survive. I exist. I notice the world again. I feel pain, yes, but also warmth. I mourn, yes, but also cherish. I carry grief, yes, but also gratitude for fragments of beauty that persist. And in the quiet, with Dutch at my side, I understand finally that survival is not about moving on. It's about living fully, even after the worst loss imaginable. I do not forget. I do not erase. I carry love. I carry grief. I carry memory. And in that carrying, I am alive. Not whole, not perfect, not the same, but alive. And sometimes in that aliveness, in the smallest spark of joy, in the quietest moment of peace, I realize that it is enough. Enough to breathe, enough to feel, enough to continue, step by step, day by day, in a world that's taken so much yet still offers a possibility.